In the quiet suburban community of Maplewood Estates, life seemed almost too perfect. The streets were lined with rows of neatly trimmed lawns, and every house was painted in soft pastel shades that gave the neighborhood a warm, welcoming feel. It wasn't just the physical appearance that made Maplewood special. It was the sense of order. Everything ran smoothly here, thanks in large part to the Homeowners Association, HOA, an organization dedicated to keeping the neighborhood pristine and harmonious. At the heart of this well-oiled machine was Karen Miller, a woman whose reputation preceded her. To some, Karen was a savior, a guardian angel who ensured that Maplewood remained the envy of surrounding suburbs. To others, she was more like a drill sergeant, constantly patrolling the streets with her clipboard in hand, ready to pounce on anyone daring enough to deviate from the HOA's strict guidelines. But love her or hate her, no one could deny that Karen cared deeply about the neighborhood. She attended every HOA meeting, led countless cleanup drives, and even organized annual block parties to foster a sense of community. Her energy was unmatched, though it often came across as overbearing. Karen's dedication to perfection had earned her a nickname among the residents, HOA Karen. Some used it affectionately, others whispered it behind closed doors when they thought she couldn't hear. Still, Karen didn't mind. She wore the title like a badge of honor, believing that maintaining high standards was key to preserving the charm of Maplewood Estates. And for years, her methods worked. The neighborhood thrived under her watchful eye, earning accolades for its cleanliness and curb appeal. But beneath the surface of this idyllic suburb lay simmering tensions. Not everyone appreciated Karen's relentless pursuit of perfection. Take Bob Thompson, for instance. A laid-back father of two, Bob moved into Maplewood 5 years ago seeking a peaceful place to raise his family. He liked the idea of living in a close-knit community where neighbors looked out for one another. What he hadn't anticipated was the level of micromanagement enforced by the HOA, and by extension, Bob's first brush with Karen happened shortly after he moved in. He decided to paint his front door a cheerful shade of teal, hoping to add a personal touch to his new home. Within hours, Karen showed up at his doorstep with a polite but firm reminder that only approved colors were allowed according to the HOA handbook. Reluctantly, Bob repainted the door to comply. Over time, similar incidents added up, leaving him frustrated but unwilling to rock the boat. After all, he reasoned, rules were rules. Despite their differences, Bob and Karen managed to coexist peacefully, for a while at least. That is, until the day Bob decided to make a change that would ignite a feud neither of them saw coming. Like many families, the Thompsons' needs evolved over the years. With 2 teenagers now driving, parking space became a pressing issue. Their current driveway barely accommodated 1 car, let alone 3. So, Bob hatched a plan. He would expand the driveway to fit all their vehicles comfortably. It sounded simple enough, but nothing in Maplewood Estates was ever truly simple. Not when Karen was involved. When word got out about Bob's plans, Karen immediately flagged the project as problematic. According to the HOA guidelines, any modifications to driveways required prior approval, and Bob hadn't sought permission before starting construction. Worse still, Karen argued that widening the driveway would disrupt the symmetry of the street, ruining the aesthetic balance she worked so hard to maintain. For Bob, this felt like yet another example of Karen's obsession with trivial details. "It's my property," he reasoned. "Why should I have to ask permission to use it?" Determined not to back down, he pressed ahead with the project, ignoring Karen's increasingly urgent requests to halt construction. This defiance set the stage for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of Maplewood Estates and expose cracks in the seemingly flawless facade of suburban life. As days turned into weeks, the tension between Bob and Karen grew palpable. Neighbors began taking sides, turning casual conversations into heated debates. Some sympathized with Bob, viewing him as a victim of unnecessary bureaucracy. Others sided with Karen, praising her commitment to upholding the HOA's standards. Little did anyone know this petty disagreement over a driveway would soon spiral into something far more serious, something that would leave the entire neighborhood reeling. Maplewood Estates, once a symbol of suburban tranquility, was about to face its greatest challenge yet. And at the center of it all stood Karen Miller, a woman whose passion for perfection had inadvertently set off a chain reaction that no one could have predicted. The feud between Karen and Bob began innocently enough, as most conflicts do, with what seemed like a small issue. But in the tightly knit world of Maplewood Estates, even minor disputes had a way of snowballing into something much bigger. It all started when Bob Thompson decided to tackle one of his family's biggest headaches: parking. With two teenagers now driving, their modest driveway simply couldn't handle the growing number of vehicles. His solution? Expand it. Bob wasn't looking to make any dramatic changes. He just wanted to widen the driveway by a few feet so that all three cars could fit comfortably. To him, it was a practical decision, one that would solve a daily inconvenience without causing harm to anyone else. After all, he reasoned, it was his property. Why should he need permission for something so straightforward? Unfortunately for Bob, nothing in Maplewood Estates operated on logic alone. The neighborhood ran on rules, lots of them, and those rules were enforced with military precision by none other than Karen Miller. When word got out about Bob's plans, Karen sprang into action. She didn't waste time marching over to Bob's house, clipboard in hand, ready to deliver her verdict. "Bob," she began, her tone polite but firm, "I noticed you're planning to expand your driveway. You know this requires prior approval. From the HOA, right?" Bob sighed, already bracing himself for yet another lecture. "Karen, come on. It's just a driveway. My kids are old enough to drive now and we can barely park our cars. I'm not building a second story or anything." Karen crossed her arms, clearly unimpressed. "It's not just a driveway, Bob. Every detail matters here. This is a community and we have standards to uphold. Expanding your driveway will throw off the symmetry of the street. Plus, you haven't submitted any plans for review. That's against the guidelines." Bob felt a familiar frustration bubbling up inside him. He'd heard this speech before, the one about curb appeal, symmetry, and maintaining the neighborhood's charm. While he understood the importance of keeping things tidy, he couldn't help but feel that Karen's priorities were misplaced. Who cared if his driveway looked slightly wider than his neighbor's? Surely there were more pressing issues to worry about. "I'll fix it later," Bob said dismissively, hoping to end the conversation quickly. "Right now my family needs space to park. Once everything settles down, I'll deal with the paperwork." But Karen wasn't satisfied with vague promises. In fact, she saw Bob's reluctance as outright defiance. Over the next few days, she escalated her efforts, sending formal letters reminding him of the HOA's policies and warning him of potential consequences if he continued without approval. These letters only fueled Bob's irritation. He began to view Karen less as a concerned neighbor and more as an obstacle standing in the way of solving his family's problems. Despite Karen's warnings, construction on the driveway moved forward. Bob hired a contractor who started pouring concrete early one Saturday morning. By mid-afternoon, the expansion was well underway, and Bob couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Finally, his family would have the space they needed. Problem solved, or so he thought. Word of the ongoing construction spread quickly through the neighborhood, reaching Karen almost immediately. Furious that Bob had ignored her repeated attempts to intervene, she stormed over to his house once, again. This time, however, she wasn't alone. Accompanying her was another HOA board member, eager to document the violation firsthand. "Bob!" Karen called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the hum of machinery. "What part of you need approval don't you understand? Stop this project right now." Bob stepped away from supervising the workers, his patience wearing thin. "Karen, seriously? Can we not do this today? Look around. You see how cramped our driveway is. We need this done." "It doesn't matter what you need, man," Karen shot back. "You're breaking the rules, plain and simple. If everyone did whatever they wanted, this place would fall apart. Is that what you want? Chaos?" Her words struck a nerve. Bob threw up his hands in exasperation. "Chaos? Really? You're acting like I'm building a skyscraper or something. It's a driveway, Karen, a driveway. Maybe instead of policing everyone's lives, you should focus on actual problems. Their argument drew the attention of nearby neighbors, some of whom stopped to watch the showdown unfold. Others peeked out of their windows, curious to see how the drama would play out. For many residents, this confrontation was both entertaining and unsettling. On one hand, they admired Karen's dedication to preserving the neighborhood's appearance. On the other, they sympathized with Bob, whose frustrations mirrored their own at times. As tempers flared, Karen delivered her final ultimatum. "Fine, Bob. Go ahead and finish your project. But don't think this is over. The HOA will address this at our next meeting, and trust me, you won't like the outcome." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving Bob fuming but undeterred. Little did either of them realize this disagreement was about to escalate far beyond a simple dispute over a driveway. What started as a clash of personalities was about to spiral into a full-blown crisis, one that would shake the entire neighborhood to its core. Over the following days, news of the feud dominated conversations throughout Maplewood Estates. Some residents sided with Karen, praising her commitment to enforcing the rules. Others rallied behind Bob, calling her actions excessive and unnecessary. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, turning casual chats into heated debates. Meanwhile, Karen stewed in her anger, determined to prove a point, not just to Bob, but to everyone who doubted her authority. Unbeknownst to anyone, her next move would set off a chain reaction that no one could have anticipated. What began as a battle over aesthetics would soon become a fight for survival, forcing the entire community to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and the fragile foundation upon which their perfect suburb rested. Karen was not the kind of person to back down from a fight, especially when she believed she was in the right. For her, this wasn't just about Bob's driveway. It was about setting an example for the neighborhood. If she allowed one rule to be broken without consequence, what would stop others from doing the same? The thought of chaos spreading through Maplewood Estates terrified her. So, instead of waiting for the HOA meeting to address the issue, Karen decided to take matters into her own hands. Her plan was bold and risky. She hired a contractor to dig up part of Bob's newly poured driveway, claiming it was necessary to inspect underground utilities. According to Karen, this was standard procedure whenever there was unauthorized construction. After all, how could they be sure that Bob's work hadn't damaged any critical infrastructure? It sounded reasonable enough, at least to her, but what Karen didn't realize was that her actions were about to unleash a disaster far beyond anything she could have imagined. On a crisp Monday morning, the contractor arrived at Bob's house with heavy machinery in tow. Neighbors peeked out their windows as the crew began tearing into the freshly laid concrete. Bob, who had been at work when the excavation started, rushed home upon hearing the news. By the time he arrived, chunks of his driveway were already scattered across the yard, and the air carried a faint but unmistakable smell, like rotten eggs. "What is going on here?" Bob demanded, his voice rising with anger as he approached Karen, who stood nearby supervising the operation. "We're checking for utility lines," Karen replied coolly, though there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. "You never submitted plans for review, so we need to ensure nothing important was disturbed." Bob stared at her in disbelief. "You think I'd risk damaging utility lines? This is ridiculous." "You've gone too far this time, Karen." Before either of them could say more, someone shouted from the crowd of onlookers, "Do you smell that? Something's not right." The odor grew stronger by the second, prompting several neighbors to cover their noses. A few people exchanged worried glances while others pulled out their phones to call emergency services. Within minutes, the unmistakable wail of sirens filled the air as fire trucks and police cars sped down the street toward Bob's house. Emergency responders arrived in full gear, quickly assessing the situation. One of them knelt near the excavation site, sniffing the air before turning to Karen and Bob with serious expressions. "This smells like gas," he said. "We need everyone to evacuate immediately. There's a good chance we're dealing with a ruptured gas line." Panic rippled through the neighborhood. Families scrambled to gather their belongings, pets were hastily corralled, and children cried in confusion as parents ushered them away from the scene. Officers cordoned off the area, warning residents to stay clear until the situation was under control. Meanwhile, utility workers rushed to locate the source of the leak, their faces grim as they worked against the clock. For Karen, the realization of what she had done hit her like a freight train. Her face turned pale as she watched the chaos unfold around her. She had meant to enforce the rules, to protect the neighborhood, but now, her actions had put lives in danger. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders, and, for the first time, she found herself questioning whether her methods had been worth it. Bob, meanwhile, was livid. As he helped his family pack essentials into their car, he couldn't help but direct his anger at Karen. "This is your fault," he yelled over the commotion. "If you hadn't meddled where you didn't belong, none of this would have happened." Karen opened her mouth to respond but stopped herself. What could she possibly say to defend her actions? Instead, she turned away, her mind racing with guilt and regret. She had always prided herself on being the backbone of the neighborhood, the one who kept everything running smoothly. Now she felt like the very thing threatening to tear it apart. As the evacuation continued, rumors spread like wildfire. Some speculated that Karen had deliberately sabotaged Bob's driveway out, of spite. Others whispered that the HOA's outdated utility maps were to blame, leaving contractors unaware of the gas line's location. Social media blew up with posts about the incident, drawing attention from local news outlets. Reporters swarmed the scene, capturing footage of frightened residents and frantic emergency workers. The once quiet suburb of Maplewood Estates was suddenly thrust into the spotlight, its picture-perfect image shattered. Back at the evacuation zone, tensions among neighbors reached a boiling point. Those who had sided with Karen now questioned her judgment, while Bob's supporters accused her of recklessness. Arguments broke out in hushed tones. Friendships strained under the weight of blame and mistrust. Even families who had lived peacefully side by side for years found themselves divided, each pointing fingers and assigning fault. Amid the turmoil, Karen retreated to the edge of the crowd, trying to make herself invisible. She couldn't bear to face the angry stares or listen to the accusations swirling around her. For years she had been the enforcer, the problem solver, the one everyone relied on to keep things in order. Now she felt like an outsider in her own community, isolated by the fallout of her decisions. Hours passed as utility workers labored to repair the damaged gas line and ensure the area was safe. By the time the all-clear was given, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the neighborhood. Residents returned to their homes, exhausted and shaken, only to find their streets transformed into a war zone. Bob's driveway was reduced to rubble, yellow caution tape crisscrossed the area, and the air still carried the faint stench of gas. For many, the night ended with unanswered questions and lingering fears. How had things spiraled so out of control? Could such a disaster have been prevented? And most importantly, who was truly responsible? As Karen lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, she replayed the events of the day in her mind. She had always believed that enforcing the rules was the best way to protect the neighborhood. But now, faced with the consequences of her actions, she wondered if she had lost sight of what really mattered. Somewhere along the way, her passion for perfection had crossed the line into obsession, and the entire community was paying the price. Little did Karen know, this was only the beginning. The gas line disaster had exposed cracks in the foundation of Maplewood Estates, not just in its infrastructure but in the relationships between its residents. Healing those wounds would require more than apologies or explanations. It would demand honesty, accountability, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. And for Karen, it would mean facing the hardest challenge of all, learning to let go of control and trust in the power of collaboration. The gas line disaster turned Maplewood Estates into a scene straight out of a movie, except this wasn't fiction. It was real life, and the stakes were higher than anyone had ever imagined. As the sun rose on the morning after the evacuation, residents woke up to find their once pristine neighborhood looking like a construction zone. Yellow caution tape fluttered in the breeze. Heavy machinery stood parked along the streets, and utility workers continued their painstaking efforts to repair the damaged infrastructure. The air still carried the faint smell of gas, a grim reminder of how close they had come to catastrophe. For many, the emotional toll was just as overwhelming as the physical damage. Families who had lived peacefully side by side for years now found themselves divided, their relationships strained by blame and mistrust. Conversations that once revolved around weekend plans or school events were now dominated by heated debates about who was at fault. Some pointed fingers at Karen, accusing her of recklessness and overreach. Others blamed Bob, insisting that his refusal to follow HOA guidelines had sparked the chain reaction leading to the disaster. And then there were those who criticized the HOA itself, questioning whether its rigid rules and outdated systems had contributed to the crisis. Social media only added fuel to the fire. Within hours of the incident, posts about the Maplewood gas line fiasco began flooding platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Photos of the chaos, emergency vehicles lining the streets, torn-up driveways, and frightened neighbors clutching their pets, went viral. Local news outlets picked up the story, turning what should have been a private neighborhood matter into a public spectacle. Reporters camped out near the entrance of Maplewood Estates, shoving microphones into residents' faces and asking loaded questions. Who is responsible for this disaster? How could something like this happen in such a well-maintained community? Is the HOA doing more harm than good? The media attention brought both scrutiny and shame. Residents who had always taken pride in living in one of the most desirable suburbs in the area suddenly felt exposed. Strangers weighed in with harsh opinions, some mocking the neighborhood's obsession with rules, while others expressed sympathy for the families affected. For Karen, the spotlight was unbearable. She had spent years cultivating her reputation as a leader and protector of Maplewood Estates. Now, she was being portrayed as a villain, a power-hungry enforcer whose actions had endangered lives. Every negative comment online felt like a dagger to her heart. Bob, too, bore the brunt of the backlash. While some hailed him as a victim of unnecessary bureaucracy, others vilified him for ignoring the HOA's rules and proceeding with his driveway expansion without approval. His family became the center of unwanted attention, with reporters showing up at their door and strangers speculating about their intentions. The stress took a toll on everyone under his roof. His wife snapped at him during arguments, frustrated by the constant drama. His teenage kids begged him to move somewhere quieter, tired of feeling like outcasts in their own neighborhood. Even Bob himself struggled to sleep at night, haunted by doubts about whether he should have handled things differently. Amid the chaos, tensions flared among neighbors. What had once been a tight-knit community now resembled a battlefield, with factions forming around loyalty to either Karen or Bob. At the grocery store, parents exchanged icy glares in the cereal aisle. In the park, children whispered about whose side they were supposed to take. During evening walks, conversations stopped abruptly when certain people approached, the silence speaking volumes about fractured friendships. Some residents tried to remain neutral, but even they weren't immune to the hostility. Mary Chen, a soft-spoken mother of 3 who rarely involved herself in neighborhood politics, found herself caught in the crossfire. When she suggested at an impromptu gathering that both sides shared responsibility, Karen shot her down, accusing her of undermining the HOA's authority. Meanwhile, Bob's supporters accused Mary of defending Karen, leaving her feeling isolated and unsure of where she belonged. The situation reached a boiling point at the next HOA meeting, which was held in a nearby community center due to the ongoing repairs in the neighborhood. Dozens of residents packed the room, their voices rising in anger as they debated what to do next. Karen sat stiffly at the head of the table, her usual confidence replaced by visible discomfort. Bob stood off to the side, arms crossed, glaring at anyone who dared speak in Karen's defense. The moderator struggled to maintain order, repeatedly banging a gavel to quiet the crowd. "This isn't solving anything," shouted Greg Miller, a longtime resident known for his calm demeanor. "We're tearing each other apart instead of figuring out how to fix this mess." But calming tempers proved impossible. One woman accused Karen of using her position to bully people. Another called Bob reckless and selfish. A man stood up to defend Karen, only to be drowned out by boos from the crowd. By the end of the meeting, no resolutions had been reached. only deeper divisions. Outside the community center, small groups gathered to vent their frustrations. Some vowed to push for reforms within the HOA, demanding greater transparency and accountability. Others threatened to sell their homes and leave Maplewood Estates altogether, unable to bear the toxicity any longer. A few even joked darkly about starting a new neighborhood, one without Karen or Bob. Through it all, Karen wrestled with guilt and regret. She couldn't shake the image of frightened children crying as they were evacuated from their homes, or the sight of Bob's ruined driveway, a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. Late at night, she stared at the ceiling, replaying the events in her mind. Had she gone too far? Was her need to enforce the rules truly worth the cost? Meanwhile, Bob grappled with his own doubts. He had wanted nothing more than to solve a simple parking problem, yet his actions had spiraled into a nightmare. As he watched his neighbors turn against one another, he wondered if standing his ground had been worth the price. By the time the gas line repairs were completed and the yellow caution tape removed, Maplewood Estates was forever changed. The physical scars would heal with time, the torn-up driveways repaved, the scuffed lawns regrown, but the emotional wounds ran much deeper. Trust had been broken, friendships tested, and the illusion of perfection shattered. The question now was whether the community could come together to rebuild, not just their infrastructure but also their relationships, or if the cracks would widen until the entire foundation crumbled. For Karen and Bob, the road ahead was uncertain. Both knew they couldn't undo the past, but perhaps, just perhaps, they could learn from it. The gas line disaster had exposed flaws not only in the neighborhood's systems, but also in its people. Healing would require humility, forgiveness, and a willingness to let go of old grudges. Whether Maplewood Estates could rise above the ashes of conflict remained to be seen, but one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. As the dust began to settle, literally and figuratively, Maplewood Estates faced a reckoning. The gas line disaster had exposed not only the fragility of its infrastructure, but also deep cracks in the community's foundation. What started as a feud over a driveway had spiraled into something far more significant, a wake-up call about how much had been overlooked in the name of perfection. Utility workers, tasked with repairing the ruptured gas line, uncovered shocking revelations. During their investigation, it wasn't just one isolated issue. They found a web of problems lurking beneath the surface. Aging water pipes, corroded electrical wiring, and crumbling sewer systems were discovered in multiple parts of the neighborhood. These weren't minor inconveniences. They were ticking time bombs waiting to explode. For years, these critical flaws had gone unnoticed, or worse, ignored by the HOA and local authorities. The discovery sent shockwaves through Maplewood Estates. Residents who had always prided themselves on living in a well-maintained model community suddenly felt betrayed. How could such glaring issues exist in a place where appearances mattered so much? Had the HOA been too focused on enforcing aesthetic rules, like painting front doors approved colors or trimming hedges to specific heights, at the expense of addressing real, pressing concerns? Karen Miller, once the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood, found herself at the center of this storm. As news of the widespread infrastructure problems spread, fingers pointed squarely at her. After all, she had been the face of the HOA for years, the one who insisted that every detail be scrutinized. But while Karen had tirelessly policed mailbox colors and holiday decorations, it seemed she, and the rest of the HOA, had failed to prioritize what truly mattered: safety. For Bob Thompson, the revelations were bittersweet. On one hand, he couldn't help but feel vindicated. The disaster proved that his initial instincts about outdated systems and poor oversight were correct. On the other hand, he knew that pointing fingers wouldn't solve anything. His family had already endured enough stress, and seeing the neighborhood unravel further only added to his frustration. He wanted answers, not arguments. Amid the chaos, a small group of concerned residents decided it was time to take action. They organized informal meetings in backyards and coffee shops, determined to address the root causes of the crisis. These gatherings attracted a diverse mix of people, young families, retirees, even some former supporters of Karen's strict enforcement policies. What united them was a shared desire to fix what had broken, both literally and figuratively. At one such meeting, held in Mary Chen's cozy living room, emotions ran high. Neighbors spoke openly about their fears, frustrations, and hopes for the future. Some criticized the HOA's lack of transparency, demanding clearer communication about maintenance schedules and utility inspections. Others suggested forming a new committee dedicated solely to infrastructure, separate from the existing HOA structure. A few even proposed hiring an independent auditor to review the neighborhood's records and identify areas needing immediate attention. Karen attended one of these meetings reluctantly, unsure of how she would be received. To her surprise, no one shouted at her or demanded her resignation, at least not outright. Instead, they listened quietly as she explained her perspective. She admitted that she had become so consumed with enforcing rules that she hadn't fully considered the bigger picture. "I thought I was protecting us," she said softly, her voice trembling, "but I see now that I may have caused more harm than good." Her admission caught everyone off guard. For years, Karen had been seen as unshakable, almost robotic in her dedication to order. Seeing her vulnerable and remorseful humanized her in ways many hadn't expected. While some remained skeptical of her sincerity, others appreciated her willingness to acknowledge her mistakes. The meetings marked a turning point for Maplewood Estates. Slowly but surely, conversations shifted from blame to solutions. Residents began working together to draft proposals for improving the neighborhood's infrastructure. They reached out to local government officials, seeking funding and support for overdue repairs. Some volunteered their own time and skills, offering to help organize cleanup drives or assist with community outreach efforts. Even Bob stepped up, surprising himself and others by agreeing to join a newly formed infrastructure task force. Though he still disagreed with many of the HOA's policies, he recognized the importance of collaboration. "We can't keep fighting each other," he told the group during one meeting. "If we want this place to thrive again, we need to work as a team." Despite these positive steps, challenges remained. Not everyone was ready to forgive and forget. Some neighbors continued to harbor resentment, refusing to participate in discussions or initiatives led by Karen or the HOA. Others worried that any changes would come too late, fearing another disaster loomed on the horizon. Trust, once shattered, takes time to rebuild, and patience was in short supply. Still, there were moments of hope. Children played together in the park again, their laughter cutting through the lingering tension. Families hosted potluck dinners, using food as a way to bridge divides. Even social media, which had fueled so much negativity, became a platform for sharing updates and celebrating small victories. When the first round of repairs was completed ahead of schedule, someone posted a photo of smiling workers holding a mission accomplished sign. The post went viral within the neighborhood, earning hundreds of likes and comments filled with gratitude and encouragement. Behind the scenes, Karen worked tirelessly to make amends. She spent hours poring over old HOA documents, searching for clues about why certain issues had been neglected. She reached out to experts in urban planning and infrastructure management, asking for advice on how to prevent similar crises in the future. Most importantly, she really listened to her neighbors' concerns, vowing to be more inclusive and transparent moving forward. For Bob, watching Karen evolve was both surprising and inspiring. He still didn't agree with everything she stood for, but he respected her willingness to change. Their interactions became less hostile, more civil. One evening, as they crossed paths near the site of the repaired gas line, Bob paused to say, "Look, I know you're trying. That means something." Karen smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed lingering guilt. "It's going to take a lot more than trying," she replied. "But I'm willing to do whatever it takes." As weeks turned into months, Maplewood Estates began to heal, not perfectly but steadily. The scars of the past remained visible, reminders of lessons learned the hard way. Yet amidst the pain and uncertainty, something remarkable emerged. a renewed sense of purpose. The gas line disaster had forced residents to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their community. In doing so, it gave them an opportunity to grow stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. For Karen, the journey was far from over. She knew that rebuilding trust would require consistent effort and humility. But for the first time in years, she felt hopeful. Not because she believed she could return to her role as the neighborhood's enforcer, but because she realized that true leadership meant listening, learning, and letting go of control. And for Bob, the experience taught him that standing up for himself didn't have to mean tearing others down. Together, along with their neighbors, they took tentative steps toward a brighter future, one built not on rigid rules, but on mutual respect and shared responsibility. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Maplewood Estates had proven one thing: even in the face of disaster, resilience and redemption were possible. All it took was courage, compassion, and a willingness to embrace change.